I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 3, Episode 16. I had to check the number there, I forgot it. This is called Ram, so spoilers for the episode as always. So this is a flashback episode, and they do the little trick at the start where it starts off with the little intro with the "you're being watched," and then halfway through it, it kind of starts to rewind. Now, having flashbacks in an episode of Person of Interest is not that strange. It's done it quite frequently in lots of regular episodes. But this doing that at the start of the episode does tell us that it's an important flashback, or it's more prominent than usual. And sure enough, it is. The entire episode, barring one scene at the end, is a flashback story. It's all in 2010. And I have to just kind of trust the series at this point that timeline wise everything here makes sense. I'm sure it does. Nothing fell out of place. But it's just a sort of thing where I couldn't remember off the top of my head exactly the various sequence of events and like what interactions certain characters had by that point in the timeline. Everything felt like it was clicking in place though, certainly by the end. And I think what I liked about this episode is that it kind of established a few of the motivations for things, particularly with Finch, getting into the start of the show. Because we teased earlier this season, Root kind of teased with Finch this idea of how many Reese's were there before he got the one that stuck. And I said at the time that kind of implies to me at least one failure had happened. And that's kind of what this episode is the story of. It's the story of that failure. It's this previous guy named Mr. Dillinger, who's effectively the man in the suit before Reese. And he's not quite as likable. He's a bit more aggressive. He is, he's not necessarily an evil guy, although he does kind of do something bad by the end of the episode. They also establish, though, that he kind of does that because he doesn't feel trusted by Finch, which acts as a motivation as to why Finch is more open with Reese when we start the main show. In the very first episode of the series, Finch actually explains to some extent what the machine is. He doesn't tell him everything about it, but he does give him a lot more than what Dillinger ever got, based on what we hear in this episode. And I think that is directly motivated by this idea that being so in the dark drove this previous man in the suit away, that Finch had to correct that. He realized that he had to do more with the next person to make sure they felt like they were more invested and they could be more trusting of him and actually be involved in what the mission was, rather than just being this cold operative that had no idea of why they were doing what they were doing and how they were getting the information they were getting. So, given how secretive Finch is, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to actually tell his operative that, but this gives us a reason why he was pushed to do it with Reese in the first place. The other big thing with this motivation aspect, though, is that, of course, Reese does show up in this episode with Stanton, and they're working a case. It turns out they're working the case of the person whose number came up. And Dillinger's trying to find this guy and catches Reese and Stanton also monitoring him, and everything's kind of entangled from that point on. And obviously Finch recognizes Reese, knows that he's from the CIA, and things progress from there. But the big thing here is that, of course, Reese here is still working for the CIA, still working with Stanton, and his mission is to kill this guy. The person that Finch and Dillinger are trying to protect is who Reese, along with Stanton, is trying to kill for the CIA. And they've been told by Control, or by Special Counsel, both of whom we see again in this episode, which is kind of a nice little throwback, because we never really saw much of them together, so her just coming into his office was kind of like this feels different. This feels like we're seeing a bit more of this relationship that we didn't get much of, because by the time we got to her, Special Counsel had already been snuffed. But it all builds up to this moment, though, where throughout the episode, Reese seems to be kind of questioning, like, do we know why we're killing this guy? And they seem to have been told that he's a traitor, that he is against national security, he's an enemy of the state. But Reese kind of seems to be questioning that, and there's a whole big moment which Finch witnesses. Finch actually is trying to get to the person of interest. What's his name here? Let me remind myself. Daniel Casey, played by Joseph Mazzello, who I thought I vaguely recognized. Turns out he was Tim in Jurassic Park, so that's him all grown up, I guess. Weird, but fun, cool, great. We got Tim from Jurassic Park in an episode. But Finch is trying to get to him to help him and doesn't want him to talk to anyone he knows, because that's ultimately how everyone else finds him for the end of the episode. But it's Reese and this guy one-on-one. Finch is in his car at a distance. He can see what's happening. He witnesses Reese lie to Stanton over the phone and claim that he's killed him. He fires a couple of shots, and you kind of know as the audience that he's made that choice even before it tells you, because it intentionally goes into a close-up, and you hear the gunshots, but you don't see the actual body drop or anything like that. It's pretty clear that, they're about to reveal that Reese made the choice not to kill him, thus revealing that Reese already was at least, obviously, we always thought he was a good man, right? And ultimately, this is showing that as an example. And it's proving it to Finch that he's a good man, and probably is why, if not the reason, at least one of the main reasons why Finch knew that Reese was the man for the job, why Finch went after Reese after this point to be the next person in the suit. Maybe not right away, but once, Reese gets into the situation he's in, and it reminds us later on when it does the quick flashes through all the timeline after this point, when he sees him at the hospital, and he's clearly thinking about Reese being the next contender for the role of man in the suit. All of that feels like it makes sense, because all this episode, Finch constantly butts heads with Dillinger, constantly thinks Dillinger's being too aggressive, that his tactics are too threatening, and is constantly telling him, hey, don't do it that way. Are you sure that's appropriate? Are you sure you're not being too aggressive? You're not really getting much trust here. And it's constantly coming up that while Dillinger may not be an evil person, that it's not quite vibing with him. And I think the idea that he sees Reese make this choice on his own, of his own free will, shows agency on Reese's part, that he's willing to make this choice and gives the guy an escape, says, hey, go get the bus to Maine, I know someone who'll meet you there, they'll get you to Canada, and you can live off the grid and, disappear. And it felt like a really good moment, because it was like, okay, we know that Reese has lots of things to redeem for, and that's a big part of his character on the show. And, this could have went down that path of, by the end of this episode, this is one of the things that Reese does have to redeem for, only to find out, no, this wasn't this. This was already him trying to do the right thing when he was using his own intuition to check things. They kind of like do a moment earlier on where Dillinger's spying on Casey, the person of interest, and Casey basically meets with this guy to report what he's found, why everyone's trying to kill him. And he basically just has the good instincts to understand that this person posing from the government isn't actually from the government, and checks out. And Dillinger comments, oh, this guy's got good instincts. And I kind of felt that about Reese at the end of the episode. It felt like he's going against what everyone else wants. He's lying to Stanton. And that leads us to the other big thing that this episode does, is that it actually ties up a lot of things that we were kind of left dangling from previous flashbacks. So Casey had a laptop. That laptop is the laptop that they were looking for in China back in season 1, and it has some of the code from the machine, which opens the other part to talk about here. Is that, so why did they want Casey? They want Casey because Casey was hired by the CIA, by special counsel / control, whoever, to test the machine for weaknesses, right? Because that's what he'd done with other people in the past, was they tested systems, software, programs for weaknesses to see if it could be hacked into, that kind of thing. But that wasn't really their goal. What they really want them to do, though, is to sort of see if they can control it, which ties into what their goal has been all this season and into last season, which is they want to get full control of the machine. They don't want it to be this thing that just sends them a number. They want to have complete access to it. That's what they've been trying to do all season. So this felt so natural to find out that they were always trying to do that they hired someone to try and hack into it. And then they were going to kill him afterwards. So they are evil, right? They're the bad guys, right? Regardless of anything else, they were still going to be evil about it and kill him anyway. But it just so happened that Casey was able to get in through the back door, probably the same back door that Nathan put in to get the numbers out, and then left with the laptop. And just by luck, the car crashed, and he was able to escape when he was locked up in the back of the car, which, honestly, I was thinking that was going to end up being a reveal of some kind. And maybe it still will link up to something at some point. I was trying to think if there was any car crashes that we knew about in 2010. Like, I was wondering if the machine did something to help him escape, because at that point he was completely on his own, and he was being taken off in a car to be killed by the CIA, the evil part of the CIA. I suspect that the machine at least intervened, and if not, like maybe something else like ties into it that we've seen before. I could be wrong though. It could never be brought up again. But at the very least, I'm going to assume the machine did something to help make the car crash. That's my theory at this point, anyway. So all of this worked really well. I thought it's a really tangled thing to explain all the links and connections, but it sets up this laptop, which everyone wants a hold of, right? Which was in China back in that season 1 episode, and at the end of this episode, Reese and Stanton are being sent off to try and get it. And we even have Control say to Special Counsel and kill them too, which obviously was part of the plan from the CIA side at the time as well. You know, that's how that all played out. They were supposed to kill each other and then the place would blow up, and it just so happens both survived. But we also have Uncle Nolan, because we have this third party. Remember that guy I was saying was impersonating someone from the government to meet with Casey? Everyone's like, who's this guy working for? We don't know where he's from. And my first thought was he's probably working for Uncle Nolan. And sure enough, Uncle Nolan shows up a little bit later in the episode as this guy's boss. And they also wanted that laptop. That also ties back into all that stuff in season 1 with those flashbacks. So all of this felt like it was explaining a lot of stuff going into that part of the backstory that we'd already explored some of. But the really exciting stuff for me, though, was the character elements. It was Finch seeing Reese make this choice and seeing that he was a good man who makes this choice based on compassion, which is exactly what he thought that Dillinger was lacking. Even if he never said that, that seems to be what he was lacking. And then also this idea of the idea that he has to be more open to whoever he works with next. He has to let them in a little bit more to make them feel that they have some agency in what they're doing as part of this mission, as part of this goal, this ideal that he's setting up for them. Because, you know, in this episode, we see that Finch expects Dillinger to work every day of the week, which Reese is okay with when we get to him, but Dillinger's like, hey, can we get someone else to rotate, like, through along with me? And he just says, you are the rotation, which is funny, though, because in present day in the show, we do have a rotation. We also have Shaw, who also pops up by the end of the episode as kind of the rookie that goes to try and get the laptop back. And she kills everyone involved except one guy who gets away with it, hence why the laptop still ended up in China. But it was the sort of thing where as soon as Special Counsel said she almost killed everyone or something like that, I'm like, oh, it's Shaw. And of course, the hood comes down and it's Shaw. And she almost hears something that leads her to Finch, which would have had Finch be killed. So that would have been a very different timeline to go down if that had happened. But so it was fun to sort of tie her back into things as well a little bit. But that's just a fun little nod towards the end more than anything. Everything else, though, felt so intertwined with everything we'd set up. What I was saying before, though, is this idea that Finch wasn't letting Dillinger in and giving him enough to really believe in what he was doing, and therefore doesn't have agency and isn't making choices based on what they're actually doing. He's just kind of making blind plays based on the orders he's been given. And what we constantly see from the CIA side of this show is that they're constantly given these blind orders they're expected to follow with no understanding of what the purpose of those orders are, who they're hunting, why they're hunting them, what the ideology is behind it, the ethics behind the decisions. And I think what we're seeing here with Team Machine is that over the 2.5 seasons we've had so far is, and much like Finch always says about having the human element still be a factor in making choices from the numbers that come from the machine, is that having human beings be able to understand the purpose for why they're doing something and making decisions and making their own moral decisions whether or not to follow those orders is a big part of why Team Machine it currently works the way it does, and why they feel like good guys, they feel like heroes because they're doing things for the right reasons. But they all have some level of agency and some choice in why they're doing it and why they're helping the team. There's never this sense of blind, like, you have to do what I say because I said you have to go do it. And I think that's something that on the CIA side and all the other establishments we've seen, Uncle Nolan's also pretty bad with his employees, but I'm just using the CIA as the main thing, mainly because that's where Reese was working and then later where Shaw was working. is that they're expected to follow this stuff blindly, and ultimately at a certain point the loyalty can't just be blind anymore. And Stanton in this episode just feels like a psychopath, to be honest. She really enjoys torturing the guy that they get. She's eating sushi, she's sticking chopsticks in his wound, and the guy that works for Nolan just jumps out the window, which I thought was darkly quite funny, to be honest. I think it was meant to be a little bit funny. Stanton's reaction to it afterwards felt like it was okay. You were meant to laugh at that a little bit. But it was a fun moment where the guy just sort of like gets up in the chair. He's still tied to the chair, but he just runs for the window and like jumps to his death. This idea that Uncle Nolan's men are so loyal that they will commit suicide rather than talk and give out information about who they are or who they work for. Which, yeah, and again, all these privacy things come back up. And I love the moment where Casey is brought back to the library and Finch is like in shock about this. Like, how dare you bring someone back here? This is a huge security thing. But then when Casey starts telling him about what he saw, because at this point he's like, okay, this guy's like the closest thing I have to someone that I can trust. And he starts describing what he was taken to and the fact that he was blindfolded and taken, even though what state he was in when he was looking at this system. But as soon as he starts talking about it, in fact, actually, that's not even the first time Finch realizes that he worked with the machine. That's when he gets in a bit deeper about it. The first time he realizes is when he's with Dillinger, and Finch just overhears, because he's listening through the phone, what Casey says about what he was doing, that he was looking at some advanced machine, and Finch freaks the F out. Like, he's like, oh, Dillinger, you have to get him off the street right now. He knows about something really serious. Get like, tie him up. Get him away from everyone. Like, Finch freaks out that anyone even knows a thing about this. And obviously, at this point in the show, he's still very protective about any knowledge about the machine. Like, no question about it. But he's at least let a few people sort of in the know, and they understand it to an extent. And there's things that he's talked about. Here, he's definitely at the point where he is not willing to say a thing. He's not saying a touch of anything. So I really appreciated that, and kind of tying it again back into that. This is obviously after Ingram died, which is, I mean, it's why Reese is also injured, but not Reese, sorry, Finch. I'm swapping names around again. I do that all the time. I feel like I probably do it like a lot and don't even notice I do it, which probably makes it very confusing to listen to me talk about a show when I'm just swapping names around. But yeah, I think, you know, if I have a critique about the episode, is that maybe there's one or two little on the nose things that they didn't need to do. Like, at one point, Dillinger says, "Hey, Finch, you're very lonely here. Never think about getting a dog?" Like, that's a bit on the nose. I could do without that. I think I like a lot of this episode, even though it is fundamentally a big prequel flashback, is that the things that it reveals were clearly somewhat mapped out long ago. It's not something they're all just making up for the sake of filling out an episode. And because it does give us a reason why Finch wants to be more open with Reese and why he pursues Reese as the next man in the suit, because he does seem like a good candidate now, that moment had a lot of weight. And I think that's the moment that sort of tied the whole thing together for me. Like, I was enjoying the episode well enough, and it was kind of interesting seeing Special Counsel and Control interact, and interesting seeing Reese in this like mission from before. Obviously, him popping up following the suspect when we were following the story from Dillinger's perspective reminded me a lot of Shaw's first episode, when we were following Shaw's perspective and we saw Finch, or we saw Reese, so I did it again. We saw Reese for the first time on the street following the same target. It reminded me a lot of that, but with this different context of, oh, this is when he's in the CIA and he's kind of the bad guy. But I think that was all fun stuff. But I think the moment that made me go, oh, this was worthwhile as an episode, it wasn't just a fun bit of like filling in some blanks, like all the connections and finding out more about the laptop's cool and all. But what made it worthwhile was the character of Finch, like being given, like basically learning the lessons that he learns from his time with Dillinger, Dillinger's death, ultimately, and Finch burying him. He literally buries Dillinger so that he can't be traced back to him. Right? He can't let the authorities just come and get him. He has to bury him and have him be this unknown grave somewhere, simply because he has to make sure there's no ties to him or the machine so that he can keep doing what he's doing. That's how private he keeps himself. So I like it as a reveal to like what that tease from earlier in the season, which is, hey, how many Reese's did you go through before this one? But also these things of like him being inspired by the choice that Reese makes. I think That's the moment. That's the moment the whole episode is like, okay, this is why this episode should exist. This is the emotional point that makes it all feel worthwhile. Of course, there's also the argument as well, based on the ending, that it's also about introducing this Casey character, because at the very end of the episode, it jumps forward to present day, and Casey is in a cabin somewhere in the woods. He's on his own. He's thriving, and there's a knock at the door. And I don't know if I'd even say this was predictable per se, but I did immediately go, I bet this is Root. Root just makes the most sense because she's the one that's traveling around doing stuff. I've not seen her in a few episodes. This just makes the most sense. And sure enough, it is Root. And she just immediately says, hey, you've got a mission to do. We've got a mutual friend and you have to go help her. I'm going to blow this place up. Go get that money under your floorboard and your fake passport. You're going to go to whatever, I can't remember what country she said now, but you're going to go somewhere and you've got a higher purpose now. And that's basically it. And says, hey, this place is going to blow up in 2 minutes. Also, there's guys with guns chasing me, so they're going to be here soon too. So just do it. And that's kind of it. That's your cliffhanger. It's interesting, though, that Casey went in the back door, had a look at some of the machine stuff. It's interesting that the machine has chosen him for something. Like, maybe the machine, in some way, like, whatever Casey got code-wise, maybe the machine, like, intentionally gave him something. Rather than just, like, it being a random bit of code that Casey got his hands on. Was the machine trying to communicate with Casey back then? And does the machine see Casey as another good person? And that's why it's kind of like bringing him back into the story. I don't know. I don't want to look up and find out how many episodes this actor's in, because it'll kind of spoil if he's like a short-term thing or a long-term character, because I really don't know. But still, I was surprised they survived to some extent, and certainly surprised to see that, oh, he's going to be an ongoing character in the present day story again. So I'm curious to see what they do with him, but very intrigued as to, again, I said this the last time we teased this stuff with the Root and like doing stuff for the machine. What's the machine up to? What's Root helping it with? I don't know. I'm looking forward to finding out and seeing all the payoff to all this stuff. So, I mean, I guess credit for the show, like, giving me a couple of normal-ish episodes and then being like, hey, here's another sort of special one that's very different and fills in some more lore, which obviously fans of the show at this point are going to be lapping up. But for me, it's the character side that really makes it sing. That's what makes it all worthwhile. Sure, it's nice to know what was on the laptop to some extent and where the laptop came from, but ultimately, it vaguely just being something related to the machine is all I ever really need to know. That was, like, fine. It's kind of this idea of, like, Finch learning lessons that leads to why he is the way he is with Reese, why he's able to push a little bit further, open up a little bit more, and be a little bit more human. And that's a subject that comes up in this very episode when he's talking to Casey, is that they're both introverts and that computers are easy because they do what they're programmed to, but humans are more complicated. And the beauty of this show is that the machine is not that anymore. The machine does not just do what it's programmed to, it's making its own choices. It's becoming more of a life and therefore more human. And Finch is also realizing he has to work better with a human being, because that's effectively what he was doing with Dillinger. He was trying to just tell him to do things like he's programming a computer, and was shocked to find that Dillinger wasn't just going to roll with that. Humans are more complicated, and fundamentally, he's done it better with Reese, where he's tried to be a little more open. He's tried to bond with them. He's tried to make them understand why they do what they do, and so on and so on. So, yeah, good episode. Good episode. So, we'll see what happens next time on Person of Interest. But that is my thoughts on this episode. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do it. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the reviews coming, both here and over at MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. Go check out those. You can also support on YouTube membership if you'd prefer to do that. But you get all the bonuses for the movie channel on Patreon if you do it that way. So I recommend Patreon. But, super thanks and chats and all that stuff is always much appreciated. So thank you very much. I will see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?